When love becomes a lifeline. How emotional starvation leads to dependency and instability in relationships. Not all relationships are born from love. Some are born from emptiness. And when they are, what begins as connection often devolves into confusion, instability, and emotional chaos. This is especially true when someone, often men, though not exclusively, enters a relationship not from a place of wholeness, but from emotional starvation. In such cases, love becomes less about mutual growth and more about survival. The result? Emotionally dependent relationships that are often unclear, non-committal, or even vulnerable to betrayal. This isn't about demonizing men. It's about understanding a pattern that shows up when emotional needs go unmet for too long, when someone hasn't built an identity that can stand on its own. They're not acting out of cruelty, but out of confusion. They're not seeking to hurt. They're seeking to feel real, valuable, and alive. Emotional starvation, what it really means. Emotional starvation doesn't necessarily mean someone has been deprived of love their entire life. Sometimes it's the result of long periods of emotional neglect, internally or externally. It might come from childhood wounds, suppressed emotions, cultural expectations, or years of being in environments where vulnerability wasn't allowed. For men especially, society often discourages emotional expression. From a young age, boys are taught to be strong, tough, and in control. Emotional awareness is rarely nurtured. The result is that many men grow into adults without the tools to name, process, or regulate their inner emotional world. But the need for emotional connection doesn't go away. It just gets buried. Eventually, when the longing becomes too intense, some men seek out relationships not to share their lives, but to find themselves. They enter love hoping to access the emotional intimacy they've been deprived of, but without the skills or clarity to engage in a healthy way. Emotional dependency, when love feels like oxygen. When someone is emotionally starving, love becomes more than a desire. It becomes a necessity. The relationship starts to feel like oxygen, like something they cannot function without. Every moment of distance feels threatening. Every disagreement feels like abandonment. Every ounce of affection feels like a lifeline. This is emotional dependency. It's the belief, often unconscious, that your emotional safety depends on another person's presence, approval, or attention. It leads to clinginess, possessiveness, and anxiety, and it places immense pressure on the partner, who may begin to feel responsible not just for the relationship, but for the other person's entire emotional state. Instead of love being something freely offered and received, it becomes a transaction. Make me feel okay or I'll fall apart. That's not love, that's survival. Instability and confusion, when intentions don't match behavior. Relationships formed out of emotional need rather than genuine connection often lack clarity. The person seeking emotional refuge may appear deeply invested, calling constantly, making intense declarations of affection, craving closeness. But underneath, there may be fear, uncertainty, and a lack of long-term vision. They may want to feel loved without being truly ready to give love. They may confuse emotional intensity with intimacy. And they may unknowingly send mixed signals, pushing close one moment, pulling away the next. The partner on the receiving end often feels confused. One day it feels like commitment, the next it feels like distance. Promises are made, but follow-through is inconsistent. Trust becomes shaky because the emotional foundation is unstable from the start. The risk of betrayal, searching for identity in others. When someone lacks a solid sense of self, they often look to relationships to define who they are. But no single relationship can carry that weight. Eventually, the emotional high fades, reality sets in, and the emptiness returns. In that vulnerable space, some people, again, often men, begin to look elsewhere. Not always physically, but emotionally. They may flirt, seek attention, or even cheat, not out of malice, but out of desperation to feel something again. Betrayal becomes a way to briefly escape the emotional void they carry. It's not that they don't care about their partner, it's that they don't truly know themselves. And without a grounded sense of self, they're constantly seeking new reflections, hoping one of them will finally tell them who they are. This isn't about men being bad, it's about men being unhealed. It's important to emphasize, this dynamic doesn't come from men being inherently manipulative, cold, or disloyal. It comes from unresolved emotional pain, unexamined identity, and unmet needs. It comes from a society that has failed to teach men how to feel deeply without shame. When emotional starvation goes unaddressed, people act out, not because they're evil, but because they're trying to survive. That doesn't excuse the behavior, especially if it causes harm, but it does offer a path forward, one that includes compassion, accountability, and healing. The path to stability. Finding identity from within. The solution to emotional dependency isn't to avoid relationships, it's to build a relationship with oneself first. That means learning to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of outsourcing them to others. Developing a strong sense of identity that isn't tied to external validation. Exploring and healing childhood wounds or relational trauma. Understanding what love means to you beyond need or survival. When someone knows who they are, they stop looking for partners to complete them. They seek connection, not rescue. They love from a place of fullness, not hunger. And when that happens, the relationship becomes a space for mutual support and shared growth, not an emotional lifeboat. Final thought. Healthy love requires a healthy self. Love is not a cure for emotional emptiness. If anything, it magnifies what already exists inside us. That's why relationships formed during times of identity crisis or emotional starvation often become chaotic, unclear, or even harmful, not because love is broken, but because the people in it haven't yet healed. The truth is, no one can complete you. No one can carry your identity, and no one can fix the wounds you've never looked at. That work is yours, and it's sacred. When you do it, when you build a solid emotional foundation from within, love becomes what it's meant to be, not a crutch, but a choice. Not a rescue mission, but a partnership. Not a place to survive, but a place to thrive. And that's the kind of love worth waiting and working for.